Ethan stood at the entrance of Drake Tower, his expensive leather shoes barely making a sound against the marble steps. The rain lashed down in relentless waves, but the boy remained still, unmoving, unbothered, as if the storm was the least of his concerns. The billionaire's eyes narrowed. Who was he? How did he end up here, right in front of his building, in the middle of the night? Ethan had no patience for unanswered questions. He turned to the security detail standing just inside the doors. "Why is there a kid sitting on my damn stairs?" His tone was sharp, cold, reflecting the man he had carefully sculpted himself into. The two guards exchanged nervous glances before one of them finally spoke. "He showed up about an hour ago, Mr. Drake. We tried to make him leave, but he wouldn't budge, just kept saying he needed to leave something behind." Ethan's gaze shifted back to the boy. It was an odd phrase, and there was something strangely unsettling about how still the boy was. Ethan could see his small hands gripping the teddy bear tightly. His knuckles were pale, his tiny frame almost skeletal beneath the drenched hoodie clinging to his skin. His face, partially hidden by wet strands of dark hair, was unreadable. Yet there was no fear in his eyes. Most kids would be terrified in this situation, cold, alone, in the middle of one of the most ruthless cities in the world. But not this one. His expression wasn't desperate nor pleading. It was calm. That made Ethan even more uneasy. He exhaled sharply. This wasn't his problem. None of this was his problem. With a shake of his head, Ethan turned on his heel and strode toward the doors. "Call the cops. Have them deal with it," he ordered without looking back. But just as he was about to step inside, a small voice stopped him in his tracks. "You don't remember me, do you?" Ethan froze. A slow, cold shiver crawled down his spine. He turned back toward the boy, studying him more closely now. He felt a strange, unwelcome sensation creeping into his chest, something dangerously close to recognition, though he couldn't place it. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, his voice lower now, almost careful. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he extended the envelope toward him. Ethan hesitated, then finally reached out, his fingers grazing the damp paper. The envelope was old, edges worn, and slightly crumpled. There was no name on it, just a single faded initial, OH, something twisted in his gut. His fingers tightened around the envelope as a name surfaced in his mind, one he had not spoken in years. Amelia Hayes, a ghost from his past, a name buried under regret, betrayal, and choices that could never be undone. His grip on the envelope faltered. He glanced down at the boy again, this time searching for answers. Could it be? But before he could ask another question, the boy was gone, vanished. The teddy bear was the only thing left behind, sitting there on the marble steps. And in Ethan's trembling hands, the envelope felt heavier than the weight of his past mistakes. Ethan stood frozen at the entrance of Drake Tower, his fingers gripping the damp envelope. The boy was gone, vanished like a shadow in the rain, leaving behind nothing but a tattered teddy bear and a storm of unanswered questions. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears as he carefully peeled open the envelope. Inside was a single, slightly crumpled photograph. His breath hitched. The image was old, the edges frayed from years of handling. But the moment he saw it, a forgotten world came crashing back. It was her, Amelia Hayes. Her familiar honey-brown eyes stared back at him, frozen in time. The same eyes that had once haunted his dreams, that had once held warmth, before it all shattered. Ethan's fingers tightened around the photo. She was gone. She had disappeared. But if this boy had her photograph, then she was alive. And if she was alive, what the hell happened to her? Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse, the photo still clutched in his hand, staring out over the glittering skyline of New York City. 1,000 memories flooded in, like an unstoppable tide. The way Amelia used to laugh softly when she caught him staring. The way she'd challenge his decisions, push him to see the world beyond his own ambition. How, for the briefest moment, she had made him think there was something more to life than power. And then, just as quickly, she was gone. She had left without a trace, no calls, no messages, just emptiness. Ethan had told himself he didn't care, that he had moved on. But now, here she was again, through a boy who had vanished into the night. And he needed answers. By morning, Ethan was no longer a man drowning in nostalgia. He was a man on a mission. "Find him," he ordered, handing the photograph to Madeline Carter, his top private investigator. Madeline was one of the best in the business, sharp, relentless, and brutally efficient. She had worked with Ethan for years, handling the kind of dirty secrets most billionaires wouldn't dare touch. She glanced at the image, raising a single brow. "You never mentioned her," she remarked. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't need to. Just find the boy." Madeline studied him for a moment before nodding. "I'll start at the shelters. If a kid that young is on the streets, someone's seen him." Ethan barely acknowledged her as she left. His focus had already shifted to the name scrawled on the back of the photograph. It wasn't Amelia's name. It was just 2 words. Find Oliver. Ethan wasn't just a man searching for a lost boy. He was still a billionaire, still the CEO of one of the most powerful tech empires in the world. And the moment he walked into Drake Industries, the weight of that empire came crashing back. His assistant, Elliot Grayson, was already waiting for him with a tablet full of updates. "The press is running wild with rumors," Elliot said, keeping pace with Ethan's long strides. "Investors are worried. They're saying you've been—" He hesitated, distracted. Ethan didn't break stride. "Are they?" Elliot sighed, adjusting his glasses. "You haven't been your usual self. People are wondering if you're—" "Losing my edge," Ethan finished, a humorless smirk tugging at his lips. Elliot didn't answer, which meant he didn't have to. Ethan had built his empire on fear and precision. He was ruthless, calculated, untouchable. But now, the rumors were already circling, whispers that he was slipping. He didn't have time for it, not when a ghost from his past had come back to haunt him. "Set up a meeting with the board," he instructed, "and push back the merger until next week." Elliot hesitated. "Are you sure that's wise?" Ethan's sharp gaze cut through him like a knife. "I don't second-guess my own decisions, Grayson." Elliot swallowed. "Understood." Ethan barely noticed as he stepped into his corner office, his mind already elsewhere. He pulled out the photograph once more, his thumb tracing the familiar features of Amelia Hayes. He wasn't just going to find Oliver. He was going to find her. Madeline worked fast. By the end of the day, she had already called in with a lead. "One of the shelters had a kid matching Oliver's description," she said. "He showed up a few days ago, didn't say much, just that he was waiting for someone." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. Waiting for who? There was a pause on the other end. "They don't know," Madeline admitted. "But they do remember one thing." Ethan leaned forward. "What?" "The kid wasn't alone," she said. "He was with a woman. And she looked a hell of a lot like Amelia Hayes." Ethan didn't wait. That night, he was already in the back of his black Bentley, heading toward the shelter. The rain had returned, pounding against the windows like a war drum. His mind raced. Amelia had disappeared years ago. If she was back, why hadn't she reached out? Why was Oliver alone that night? What the hell was she running from? The Bentley skidded to a stop in front of the shelter. Ethan stepped out, barely noticing the rain soaking through his coat. He pushed through the doors, only to find the shelter in chaos. The front desk worker was on the phone, speaking in urgent whispers. The hallways buzzed with tension. Ethan's eyes locked onto Madeline. What the hell happened? She was already pulling him aside, her expression grim. They were here, she confirmed. But they're gone now. Ethan's chest tightened. Gone. Again. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling inside him. We'll find them, Madeline assured. But Ethan wasn't so sure. Because if Amelia was still running after all these years, that meant someone was still chasing her. And if he didn't find them first, he might lose her forever. The city never slept, and neither did Ethan. The storm had passed, but inside his mind, chaos raged on. Oliver was missing. Amelia had resurfaced, only to disappear again. And the past he had buried was clawing its way back to life. Ethan stood in his office, staring at the massive glass window overlooking the city. The skyline was painted in hues of silver and blue, but all he could see was her face. Amelia Hayes. Once, she had been the center of his world. And then, just as suddenly, she had vanished. Ethan had told himself it didn't matter. He had built an empire, had climbed to the top, had become the man the world feared. But none of it mattered now, because somewhere in this city, Amelia was alive, and she had a son who needed him, a son who, in some cruel twist of fate, was his own. The realization hit like a freight train. Oliver was his, and he never even knew. Madeline's voice snapped him back to reality. I ran a deeper search into Amelia's disappearance, she said, setting a thick manila folder onto his desk. I found something odd. Ethan's jaw tightened. What? Madeline sighed, flipping open the file. She didn't just disappear, she said. She was erased. Ethan's fingers curled into a fist. What do you mean, erased? Madeline tapped the file. Her records, bank statements, credit history, employment records, everything gone, as if she never existed. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. That's impossible, he muttered. Madeline shook her head. Someone went through a hell of a lot of trouble to wipe her from the system, she said. And not just hers. She turned another page. Oliver's too. Ethan's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a woman running away from a relationship. This was something bigger, something deadly. Ethan's eyes flicked to the photo again. Oliver clutching that tattered teddy bear, standing in the rain. What had Amelia gotten herself into? More importantly, who was after them? There was only one place to start. Ethan slammed the file shut. I want you to track down anyone who knew Amelia before she disappeared, he said. Co-workers, friends, family. Madeline nodded. Already on it. And Madeline? She looked up. Whoever did this, whoever erased her, find them. But Ethan wasn't the only one looking. Across the city, in a penthouse even grander than his own, another man sat in the shadows, Jonathan Kane. The name was legendary in the world of finance, whispered in the halls of Wall Street. And he was watching. His assistant handed him a tablet, showing an image of Ethan leaving the shelter. He's getting close, the assistant said. Kane smirked. Let him. The assistant hesitated. Sir, Kane raised a hand. I want to see how far he's willing to go, he murmured. His eyes glinted in the dim light. And when he gets there, I want to be the one waiting. The next morning, Madeline called. Her voice was tight, urgent. We found something. Ethan's pulse spiked. Where? An old apartment, East Village. It was Amelia's last known residence before she vanished. Ethan didn't wait. Within minutes, he was in his car. the city streets blurring past. Something told him he was running out of time. The building was old and crumbling, forgotten amidst the towering glass skyscrapers. Ethan stepped inside, the air thick with dust and silence. Madeline was already there, standing beside an empty doorway. "She lived here?" Ethan asked. Madeline nodded. "For about a year before she disappeared." Ethan stepped forward. The place was small, abandoned, but the moment he walked in, he could feel her presence. Then he saw it. A single box, tucked in the corner, dust-covered, untouched. Ethan's fingers shook as he knelt beside it. Inside there were letters, handwritten, faded with time. One was addressed to him. With trembling hands he opened it. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I never got the chance to tell you the truth. I never wanted to leave. But I had to. Not for me. For him. For Oliver. There are people who will come for him. People who will never stop. I had to keep him safe. I had to disappear. I loved you, but I couldn't stay. And now, if you found this letter, it means you're close. But Ethan, please, be careful. They will kill you before they let you find us." Ethan's hands tightened around the paper. A storm raged inside him. She had been protecting Oliver. From what? From who? And then, his phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. "Stop looking for them." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He looked back at the letter, at the familiar curves of Amelia's handwriting. She had been running for years. Now, it was his turn to run, to find her before it was too late. The night had settled over New York, a thick shroud of darkness that seemed almost too quiet. But Ethan Drake knew better. This city was never quiet. It whispered in alleyways, murmured in underground deals, screamed in the silence of those who disappeared. And somewhere in that silence, Amelia was waiting. Ethan's grip tightened around the steering wheel. The message on his phone burned into his mind. Unknown number. Stop looking for them. It was a warning, a threat, and it only made him more determined. Beside him, Madeline Carter was scanning through files on her tablet, her face set in deep concentration. "There's someone pulling the strings behind this," she said. Whoever erased Amelia from the system had serious power. Ethan's jaw clenched. "And we're going to find out who." Madeline glanced at him. "You're sure you're ready for this?" Ethan met her gaze. "I don't have a choice." Their first stop was a law firm in Lower Manhattan. Samuel Grayson, a name that had come up more than once in Amelia's past. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a fixer, the kind of man who made problems disappear. Ethan and Madeline entered the dimly lit office, the air thick with the scent of cigars and old money. Grayson sat behind a mahogany desk, his expression unreadable. "What can I do for you, Mr. Drake?" he asked, his voice smooth. Ethan slid a photo of Amelia across the desk. "You helped her disappear," Ethan said. "I want to know where she went." Grayson smiled, leaning back. "I help a lot of people disappear." Ethan's patience was running thin. "I don't have time for games." Grayson exhaled, tapping his fingers on the desk. "You're not the first person looking for her," he said. Madeline's eyebrows lifted. "Who else?" Grayson hesitated, and that's when Ethan knew. He was afraid. "There's a man," Grayson finally said. "Jonathan Kane." The name sent a chill through Ethan's spine. Kane wasn't just a businessman. He was a predator. And if he was after Amelia, that meant things were even worse than Ethan thought. Meanwhile, across the city, a small figure sat curled up in a shelter. Oliver. His hands gripped his teddy bear, his small body trembling. He had seen Ethan. He had felt safe for the first time in a long time, but the voice in his head warned him not to trust too much, because whenever he started to feel safe, They found him again. The people who had been after his mother. The ones who whispered his name in the dark. Oliver squeezed his eyes shut. Somewhere out there, his mom was still running, and he had to stay hidden. In a private club, far away from the shelters and the rain-soaked streets, Jonathan Kane swirled a glass of whiskey. A man approached him, his face pale. "Drake is looking for the woman," the man said. Kane's lips curled into a smirk. "Let him." The man hesitated. "Sir, if he keeps digging." Kane's smile disappeared. "Then we bury him, before he gets too far." His voice was calm, but his eyes were ice. Ethan stared at the manila folder in front of him. It was Amelia's file. Every detail of her past, every record she once had, erased. But there was one thing they couldn't erase. A single handwritten address. Ethan ran his fingers over it. It was in Queens, a place Amelia had once stayed. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was everything. That night, Ethan and Madeline arrived at the rundown apartment. It was abandoned, but something felt off. Madeline moved cautiously, flashlight in hand. Ethan pushed open the door, and that's when they saw it. A single message, written in red across the wall. "Leave while you still can." And below it, a photograph of Oliver. Ethan's heart stopped. Someone was watching them, and they were already one step ahead. Before Ethan could react, his phone buzzed again. A new message. Unknown number. "You should have stayed out of this, Drake." Ethan's grip tightened. This wasn't just about Amelia anymore. It was about Oliver. And he wasn't going to stop, no matter what. The weight of truth is heavier than any burden. Ethan sat in the dimly lit apartment, his eyes locked on the photograph of Oliver. His hands clenched into fists, his heartbeat a hammering rhythm in his chest. The message on the wall still burned in his mind. "Leave while you still can." But walking away was no longer an option. Somewhere out there, Amelia was still running, and Oliver was still in danger. Ethan swore under his breath, "I won't lose them again." The next morning, Ethan stormed into his office, his mind a whirlwind of determination and fury. Madeline was already there, sifting through files, her expression grim. "We need answers," Ethan said. "Everything about Amelia. Every place she's been. Every name connected to her." Madeline exhaled. "I've been digging and it's worse than we thought." She slid a file across the table. Ethan opened it, his stomach twisting as he scanned the contents. Amelia Hayes, classified as missing. Last sighting 5 years ago. Associated with whistleblower cases against corporate corruption. And then in bold red ink, Jonathan Kane, High Risk Association. Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. Kane wasn't just a businessman, he was a predator, and Amelia had been his prey. Madeline hesitated before handing Ethan another document. "You need to see this," she said quietly. Ethan took it. It was a birth certificate. His heart stopped. Oliver Hayes. Father, Ethan Drake. For a moment the room spun. The air left his lungs. Number this. This can't be right. But it was. Everything inside him shifted. Oliver wasn't just some lost child. Oliver was his son. And Amelia had kept him hidden from him. Ethan clenched his fists, anger and confusion twisting inside him. "She knew," he murmured. "She knew. And she didn't tell me." Madeline's expression softened. "She was protecting him, Ethan. From Kane." Ethan exhaled sharply, his thoughts racing. If Kane knew about Oliver, that meant he had been hunting his own son. Amelia had vanished for a reason. 5 years ago, she had blown the whistle on a corporate crime ring. But Kane had buried the truth and had tried to bury her with it. She had fled before he could silence her, and she had taken Oliver with her. She had sacrificed everything to keep him safe. Her career, her life, even the truth about who Oliver's father really was. Ethan felt his chest tighten. For all his wealth and power, he had been blind. Amelia had suffered alone, while he had lived in ignorance. And now, Cain was trying to finish what he started. Ethan inhaled deeply, forcing his emotions into a tight, controlled grip. Oliver was his son, and Cain was not going to take him. Not now. Not ever. Ethan turned to Madeline. "We find him," he said. His voice was steel. "We find Oliver before Cain does." Madeline nodded. "I'll track Cain's movements. If he's making a move, we'll know." Ethan glanced at the photograph of Oliver, a small boy, clutching his teddy bear, completely unaware that the man who had once abandoned his mother was now his only hope. "I won't fail him again." Across the city, in a penthouse bathed in shadow, Jonathan Cain swirled a glass of bourbon. A man stood before him, shifting nervously. "We lost track of the boy," the man muttered. "Drake has people looking." Cain's jaw tightened. "Then we find him first." The man hesitated. "Sir, if Drake keeps digging—" Cain's hand snapped out, slamming the glass onto the table. "Drake doesn't matter," he said coldly. The room was silent. Then Cain leaned forward. It's the boy we need." His voice was eerily calm. "Bring him to me." The man nodded and left. Cain picked up an old photograph. Amelia. A cruel smile twisted his lips. "You thought you could run forever, didn't you?" he murmured. He set the photo down. Then he picked up a knife. "You were wrong." Ethan and Madeline drove through the streets of Brooklyn, following their first lead. An old shelter worker had called them. Someone had seen Oliver. Ethan's grip on the steering wheel was tight. He had lost 5 years of his son's life. He would not lose another second. They arrived at the shelter, a rundown building with flickering neon lights. Inside, a woman greeted them, her eyes wary. "You're looking for a boy?" she asked. Ethan pulled out the photo. The woman studied it. Then she nodded. "He was here," she said. "But he was scared." Ethan's breath caught. "Where is he now?" The woman hesitated. "Gone." A sick feeling twisted in Ethan's gut. "Gone where?" She shook her head. "He ran. Said someone was coming for him." Ethan's mind raced. Cain's men were closing in, and Oliver was all alone. Just then, Ethan's phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. Tick-tock. "Drake, you're already too late." Ethan's blood ran cold. Then another message. An address. A location in Queens. Ethan didn't hesitate. He turned to Madeline. "We're going after him." She nodded. "And if it's a trap?" Ethan's eyes hardened. "Then we walk straight into it." Because if Oliver was the city lights blurred past, as Ethan's car sped through the darkened streets of Queens. His grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled, jaw clenched, as he replayed the cryptic message over and over in his mind. "Tick-tock. Drake, you're already too late." The address attached to the text was seared into his brain. 52 Baxter Street, a warehouse district, a place where things and people disappeared. Ethan's gut told him this was a trap, and yet he had no choice. Oliver was out there, his son, and he would walk into hell to bring him home. Madeline, sitting in the passenger seat, glanced at him. "You know this could be an ambush, right?" she said. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. "I don't care." She sighed. "At least let's be smart about it. We need backup." Ethan shook his head. "No time." Madeline exhaled sharply. "Damn it, Ethan. You're walking into this like a suicide mission." He turned to her, his voice like steel. "This isn't just a mission, Madeline. It's my son." She held his gaze for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "Then let's make sure we don't get him killed in the process." She pulled out her phone, and sent a quick message. Marcus is on standby. If we don't check in within an hour, he'll come looking. Ethan didn't argue. He pressed the gas pedal harder. They were running out of time. The car came to a slow stop outside the address. 52 Baxter Street. A massive, abandoned warehouse, its windows shattered, its walls covered in graffiti. The perfect place to hide something. Or someone. Ethan stepped out, his muscles tensed. The air was thick with rain and danger. Madeline checked her gun, then nodded at him. Let's move. They slipped inside through a rusted metal door. The air was damp, filled with the scent of oil, mildew, and something rotten. A dim light flickered overhead. Somewhere in the shadows something creaked. Madeline whispered, "This is bad." Ethan scanned the darkness, his pulse thrumming. And then, a sound, a soft whimper. His blood turned to ice. Oliver? Ethan bolted toward the sound, weaving between crates and old machinery. A metal cage stood in the center of the warehouse. Inside, Oliver, curled up, holding his teddy bear, his small body trembling. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. Oliver! The boy lifted his head, his wide, terrified eyes locking onto Ethan's. Dad? The single word shattered him. Ethan rushed forward. And then the lights slammed on. A voice echoed through the warehouse. Well, well, well. Look who took the bait. Ethan's stomach dropped. From the shadows, Jonathan Kane stepped forward, flanked by 6 armed men. Ethan froze. They were surrounded. Kane smiled. You never were the type to think before acting. Were you, Drake? Ethan glared. Kane took slow, deliberate steps toward the cage, resting his hand on the metal bars. Oliver flinched. Ethan's rage ignited. Let him go. Kane laughed. Oh, Ethan, you don't make demands here. Madeline gripped her gun. But Kane's men already had their weapons trained on them. You came alone, Kane mused. That was unwise. Ethan didn't answer. His mind was spinning, searching for a way out. But Kane wasn't done. He crouched down, looking at Oliver. You know, he said softly, I always wondered what kind of man your father would be. Turns out, he's just as reckless as your mother. Oliver whimpered, pressing back against the bars. Ethan saw red. Get away from him, he snarled. Kane stood up, smirking. You see, Ethan, he said, this isn't about the boy. He gestured at his men. This is about you. Ethan's breath hitched. And then, pain exploded in his skull. A sharp crack. His vision blurred. Darkness swallowed him whole. When Ethan came to, his wrists were tied behind a chair. His head throbbed. His vision swam as he blinked into focus. Kane sat across from him, calm, amused. Good morning, sunshine. Ethan's body tensed. Then his heart stopped. Oliver was sitting in a corner, terrified. Kane followed Ethan's gaze and smirked. Relax. The boy's fine. For now. Ethan's teeth clenched. What do you want? Kane sighed. It's not what I want, Ethan. It's what you want. He leaned in. And how far you're willing to go to get it. Meanwhile, Madeline stirred. Her hands were tied, but not well. She slowly worked her wrist free, keeping her breathing even. One of Kane's guards stood nearby, unaware. The moment was coming. She just had to wait for it. Ethan, across the room, caught her eye. She gave the smallest nod. Game on. Kane leaned back, studying Ethan. I'm going to make you an offer, Drake. Ethan's muscles tensed. Kane smiled. You walk away. You forget the boy. Forget Amelia. Forget everything. His voice dropped. Or you watch them die. Silence hung heavy. Ethan's heart pounded. Then Kane stood up. You have until tomorrow to decide. He motioned to his men. Take them away. Ethan's chair lurched backward. Oliver cried out, "Dad!" Ethan thrashed against his bindings, but the world spun as he was dragged into the dark. Ethan's head throbbed as he was thrown into the damp, windowless rooms. His wrists burned from the tight ropes, and his shoulders ached from the rough handling of Cain's men. The door slammed shut. A single flickering bulb illuminated the grimy concrete walls. Across from him, Oliver sat curled up, clutching his teddy bear. His little body trembled. His wide, frightened eyes met Ethan's. "Dad?" The word hit Ethan like a bullet. Not Mr., not Sir, not even Ethan. Dad. It was the first time Oliver had said it out loud. And Ethan swore in that moment he would not fail him. Ethan took a slow breath. His mind raced. Think, Drake. He scanned the room. A rusted air vent. A broken chair. A drain in the floor. His hands were still tied, but he could feel the knots. Sloppy work. Good. "Oliver," he whispered. The boy sniffled, looking up. "I need you to listen to me very carefully, okay?" Oliver nodded. "I need you to help me untie my hands." Oliver hesitated. But, what if they come back?" Ethan forced a small smile. "That's why we have to be fast." Oliver crawled closer, his small fingers fumbling with the ropes. Ethan felt them loosen, just a little more. The door rattled. Oliver froze. Ethan whispered, "Keep going." Footsteps echoed outside. "Hurry, kid." The ropes fell away. Ethan's hands were free. The door swung open. A guard stepped inside. Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged. His shoulders slammed into the man's chest, knocking him backward. The guard stumbled, trying to reach for his gun. Too slow. Ethan's fists struck like iron. 1, 2, 3. The guard hit the floor, unconscious. Ethan turned, his breath heavy. Oliver stared at him, wide-eyed. "You..." The boy's voice shook. "You fought him." Ethan exhaled. "Yeah, kid, I did." Oliver swallowed hard. Are you a superhero?" Ethan almost laughed. He crouched down, putting a hand on Oliver's shoulder. "No, buddy, just a dad." Oliver blinked. A flicker of trust. Ethan stood. "We need to move." He grabbed the guard's gun and keys. Then he took Oliver's hand. Time to get out of here. The warehouse was a maze of corridors. Every turn looked the same. Gray, damp, endless. Ethan moved fast, Oliver close behind. Footsteps, voices. "They're loose." The alarm blared. Damn it. Ethan turned a corner and ran straight into 2 guards. A gun was raised. No time. Ethan fired first. One guard dropped. The other swung at Ethan. Ethan dodged. A punch to the ribs. Pain exploded. But he didn't stop. He grabbed the man's arm, twisted, snapped. The guard screamed, collapsed. Ethan didn't look back. He scooped up Oliver. "Hold on." He ran. A door burst open ahead. Madeline, gun raised, eyes blazing. "Get down!" Ethan dropped. Madeline fired. The last guard fell. She rushed forward. "Took you long enough?" Ethan smirked. "I had to make an entrance." Oliver clung to his shirt. Madeline's expression softened. "Hey, kiddo." Oliver peeked at her. She grinned. "Let's go save your mom, huh?" Oliver nodded. Ethan tightened his grip on the gun. It wasn't over. Not yet. They burst through the final set of doors and straight into Jonathan Cain, surrounded by 6 armed men, guns aimed. Cain smirked. Well, well, well. "Didn't I warn you, Ethan?" Ethan pushed Oliver behind him. Cain tilted his head. "You just don't know when to quit." Ethan gritted his teeth. "You took my son." Cain chuckled. "He was never yours to begin with." Ethan's hands fisted. Madeline whispered, "We're outnumbered." Ethan's pulse pounded. No way out. No backup, and then, boom! A deafening explosion. The power cut. Darkness swallowed them. A new voice echoed through the chaos. Get down! Marcus hailed. Bullets erupted. Ethan grabbed Oliver and ran. Madeline fired back. Kane's men scattered. Screams. Gunfire. The warehouse shook. Ethan didn't stop. He ran until sunlight. They burst out the exit. Sirens wailed. Police swarmed in. Ethan collapsed to his knees. Oliver was safe. And Kane was finally cornered. Kane stumbled outside, bleeding. Furious. Police aimed their guns. He laughed, spitting blood. You think this changes anything, Drake? Ethan stepped forward. You're done. Kane's grin faltered. For the first time, he looked afraid. Marcus slapped cuffs on him. Jonathan Kane, you're under arrest. Kane was dragged away. Ethan turned. Oliver ran into his arms. Dad! Ethan held him tight. For the first time in his life, he felt whole. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. As the police cleared the scene, Ethan's phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. This isn't over. Amelia is still out there. Ethan's breath caught. His grip on Oliver tightened. Amelia. She was alive, and he was going to find her. Ethan's heart pounded as he stared at the text on his phone. This isn't over. Amelia is still out there. The words burned into his mind. Amelia. Alive. He felt Oliver's small hand tighten in his grip. The boy's wide eyes were filled with exhaustion, but also something new, trust. He had saved Oliver, but now he had to save her. Ethan turned to Marcus and Madeline, determination hardening his voice. We're going after her. Tonight. Madeline exhaled sharply. You just took down one of the most powerful criminals in the city. Maybe we take a second to... No. Ethan's voice was firm. I'm not waiting. Kane had Amelia hidden for years. If he knows she's alive, she's in danger. We move now. Marcus exchanged a look with Madeline, then gave a short nod. I'll get the gear ready. Madeline crossed her arms. You really think you can just storm in? And Ethan didn't answer. He was already moving. The message had a location. Pier 47. A rundown abandoned dockyard on the edge of the city. Remote. Isolated. The perfect place to disappear. As they approached in an unmarked black SUV, the air smelled of salt and decay. The moon cast long shadows over rusted shipping containers and towering cranes. Ethan's fingers itched over the grip of his gun. Marcus adjusted his bulletproof vest. If she's here, we're not leaving without her. Oliver, nestled in the back seat, watched Ethan. Dad? Ethan turned, momentarily caught off guard by the word. Yeah, buddy. Oliver hesitated, then in a small, fragile voice. Will she be okay? Ethan knelt down. I promise, we're gonna bring her home. Oliver's lips pressed together. Then slowly, he handed Ethan something. The teddy bear. For her, Oliver whispered. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. He took the bear and held it tight. Then he stood. Let's move. Madeline disabled the security cameras. Marcus checked his weapon. We go in quiet. Ethan, for once, didn't argue. Stealth, speed, precision. They slipped inside the facility, moving through the shadows. The warehouse was massive, filled with crates, old machinery, and catwalks overhead. Then they heard it. A muffled scream. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Amelia. He didn't wait. He moved. A guard rounded the corner. Ethan grabbed him, slammed him into the wall. The man struggled, but Ethan was faster, stronger, angrier. A few quick strikes. The guard crumpled. Madeline and Marcus took down two more. The team pushed forward. Another scream. Closer now. Ethan's pace quickened. Then, a door at the end of the hall. Locked. Heavy duty. Ethan didn't hesitate. He kicked it open. Inside, Amelia was tied to a chair. Her face bruised, her wrists raw from the ropes. But her eyes, they widened the second they met Ethan's. "Ethan?" He rushed forward. Madeline covered the door. Marcus checked the hall. Ethan untied the ropes, hands shaking. She fell into his arms. She was alive, but she was weak. "Amelia," he whispered, voice breaking. She clung to him. I thought you'd never find me." Ethan swallowed. "I'm here now." Her fingers curled into his shirt. "Is Oliver?" Ethan nodded. "He's safe." A small broken sob escaped her lips. Then, a gunshot. Marcus yelled, "We've got company." Kane's remaining men swarmed the warehouse. Gunfire erupted. Ethan shielded Amelia. "We have to move." Madeline returned fire, taking down two. Marcus threw a smoke grenade. Ethan grabbed Amelia's hand. "Run." They dodged bullets, weaving between crates. A guard lunged. Ethan slammed him down. Marcus held the exit. "Go, I'll cover you." Ethan and Amelia burst outside. Oliver was waiting in the SUV. The second he saw her, his eyes filled with tears. "Mom," Amelia gasped. She ran, scooping him into her arms. "My baby." Oliver clung to her. Ethan's chest tightened. This was what he fought for. This was everything. But it wasn't over. Kane's second in command, Vincent Gray, emerged from the warehouse. Gun raised. Ethan stepped in front of Amelia and Oliver. Vincent sneered. "You think this ends here?" Ethan's grip tightened on his gun. Then, a shot rang out. Vincent staggered, collapsed. Behind him, Marcus stood, gun smoking. "You talk too much," he muttered. The police arrived minutes later. Kane's men arrested. Vincent dead. The nightmare over. Ethan turned to Amelia. She was still holding Oliver. Tears streamed down her face. She looked at Ethan, voice trembling. "You saved us." Ethan shook his head. "No." He glanced at Oliver. "He saved me." Oliver smiled, and for the first time in Ethan's life, he felt whole. The tension in Ethan's penthouse was suffocating. Outside, the city never slept, but inside, silence reigned. Oliver sat curled up on the couch, gripping his teddy bear. Amelia sat beside him, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but her hand never left his back, rubbing slow, comforting circles. Ethan stood by the window, staring out into the skyline. The war with Kane wasn't over. Not yet. And something in his gut told him they were running out of time. Ethan barely recognized himself anymore. The ruthless businessman, the cold, untouchable billionaire, was gone. In his place stood a man who couldn't stop caring. Madeline was on the phone across the room, her voice clipped and professional. "We need to move them. Now." Marcus crossed his arms. "Kane's network is still out there. We got Vincent, but that doesn't mean they'll stop coming." Amelia's fingers tightened on Oliver's back. Ethan turned. "We're not running." Madeline lowered the phone. "We don't have a choice." Marcus sighed. "Kane's men broke into your penthouse last night. You think they'll stop?" Ethan clenched his jaw. "I won't let them take Oliver or Amelia." Oliver shifted on the couch. "We can't go." His voice was small. Amelia kissed the top of his head. "We'll go somewhere safe, baby." Oliver looked up at Ethan. "But Dad will come too, right?" Ethan's breath hitched. He knelt beside Oliver, brushing the boy's messy hair back. "Of course, buddy. We stick together." Oliver nodded, trusting him completely. Ethan wasn't going to break that trust. Not ever. Madeline arranged a safe house upstate, a secluded cabin in the woods. "We stay low, regroup, and figure out our next move," she said. Ethan hated it. He didn't like hiding, but Oliver's safety came first. So he packed. So they left. And for the first time in his life, Ethan walked away from a fight. The cabin was peaceful. The air smelled of pine, the silence only broken by birdsong and rustling leaves. For a moment, just a moment, Ethan let himself breathe. Oliver was happy here. He ran through the fields, his laughter ringing through the crisp morning air. He built forts out of blankets, played games with Amelia. And Ethan watched his son be a kid, watched Amelia smile, a real smile, watched a world he never thought he'd deserve. But deep down, he knew it couldn't last. Night fell. Ethan stood on the porch, fingers curled around a glass of whiskey. Marcus sat beside him, scanning the woods. "We should talk about the plan," Marcus said. Ethan exhaled. "Yeah." Then a twig snapped. Ethan froze. Marcus stood instantly. A shadow moved in the trees. Then another. Ethan's stomach dropped. "They found us." The first shot shattered the window. Amelia screamed. Oliver dived under the couch. Ethan grabbed a gun from the cabinet. Marcus was already moving. Madeline shoved Amelia and Oliver toward the back door. "Go now." But the back door slammed open. Men in black masks. Ethan fired. One down. Marcus tackled another. Amelia pulled Oliver behind her, shielding him. Ethan's vision went red. No one was taking his family. He fought with everything he had. Every punch, every shot, every brutal move. He wasn't the businessman anymore. He was a father. And fathers didn't lose. Ethan killed the last attacker. Breathing heavy, blood on his hands. Amelia clutched Oliver, tears streaking down her face. Ethan grabbed them both. "We have to move," Madeline groaned, clutching a bullet wound in her arm. "They're not done." Marcus checked the attacker's pockets. "They weren't here to kill us." Ethan stiffened. "Then what?" Marcus handed him a folded note. Ethan unfolded it. One sentence. "We still have Amelia's insurance policy." Ethan's pulse roared. Amelia went pale. And Oliver just held his teddy bear tighter. Because deep down, they all knew. Cain wasn't finished with them yet. The road stretched endlessly ahead, winding through the dense forest. The headlights of Ethan's black SUV cut through the darkness, illuminating the rain-slick pavement. Ethan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He glanced at the rearview mirror. Amelia sat in the back seat, her arms wrapped tightly around Oliver, whispering reassurances. The boy's small body trembled, his wide eyes staring at the raindrops streaking the glass. He was afraid. Ethan hated that. They had barely escaped the cabin attack. They couldn't afford another ambush. "Where are we going?" Amelia asked softly. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Somewhere safe." Madeline, still clutching her wounded arm, muttered, "We said the last time." Silence. Because she was right. There was no such thing as safe anymore. Ethan made a sharp turn, pulling onto a dirt road that led to an abandoned lake house. It belonged to a former business partner, a man who had vanished after a failed deal years ago. No one should know about it. No one, except Ethan. As they stepped inside, dust swirled in the dim light. The house smelled of damp wood and old memories. Oliver clung to Amelia's hand. Marcus checked the perimeter, then locked the doors. "We can stay here for a few days. Maybe regroup." Madeline slumped onto a couch, exhaling sharply. "I need stitches." Amelia shot Ethan a glare. "She needs a hospital." Ethan ignored her, already pulling out a med kit. "We can't risk it." Madeline snorted. "I love how you think you're in charge." Ethan wasn't listening. His gaze drifted to Oliver. The boy hadn't spoken since they got into the car. Not one word, just silent trembling. Ethan crouched beside him, lowering his voice. "Hey, buddy." Oliver blinked up at him, expression unreadable. "You okay?" "Nothing. Just a small, almost imperceptible shake of the head." Ethan's chest tightened. He wasn't good at this, at comfort, at connection. But something inside him broke at the sight of this child. His son, so small, so scared, so alone. He reached out, ruffling Oliver's hair. "We'll figure this out, I promise." Oliver's lip quivered. Then, to Ethan's surprise, he nodded, small, but real. As the night stretched on, Ethan and Amelia found themselves alone in the kitchen. The storm outside raged, matching the turbulence in his chest. "You should get some sleep," Ethan muttered, pouring himself a drink. Amelia crossed her arms. "And you should stop acting like you don't feel anything." His grip tightened on the glass. "I don't have that luxury," she scoffed. "No, Ethan, you don't let yourself have that luxury." Silence. "Then I kept him from you to protect him." Ethan's stomach dropped. Amelia's voice wavered. "I was scared. I had nothing. You were too powerful, too dangerous. And Cain, he—" She swallowed. "He made sure I had no choice." Ethan turned to her. Amelia's eyes were glossy with unshed tears. "I hated you for what you did back then," she whispered. "But I never stopped loving you." Ethan's breath caught. He should have been angry. He should have been furious. But all he could think was, he had lost so much time. Oliver should have grown up knowing him. Instead, he had been running, hiding, afraid. And Ethan had done nothing. Regret settled in his chest like a stone. He exhaled. Then, in a voice rougher than he intended, "I won't let him hurt you again." Amelia let out a shaky breath. For the first time in years, she believed him. The next morning, Oliver found a deck of old playing cards in the lake house. Ethan was sipping coffee when the boy hesitated in front of him. Oliver shuffled his feet, then, almost too quiet to hear, "Do you want to play?" Ethan froze. A simple request. A tiny, fragile bridge between them. His fingers curled around the coffee cup. Then, finally, "Yeah, buddy, let's play." Oliver's face lit up. And for the first time in forever, Ethan felt something warm spread through his chest. Something like hope. But hope was dangerous, because in the shadows, Cain was still hunting, still watching, still waiting. And he had one final move left. A move that would force Ethan to make the hardest choice of his life. The morning was eerily quiet. Ethan stood at the edge of the lake, the mist rolling over the water in ghostly tendrils. His mind was racing, calculating, strategizing. They were running out of time. Oliver was safe for now. But Cain wouldn't stop. Ethan had spent his whole life controlling outcomes, buying out competitors, silencing threats, winning. But this wasn't a business deal. This was war, and he had too much to lose. Back in the cabin, Madeline sat at the worn wooden table, her laptop open. She had been working all night, tracing Cain's financials, digging through encrypted files. Her eyes were bloodshot, her fingers tapping furiously on the keyboard. Then, she froze. Her breath hitched. "Ethan." He turned sharply. Madeline's face was pale as she turned the screen toward him. "I found something." Ethan leaned in, his stomach twisting at the document she had pulled up. A contract, signed years ago. By him. Ethan's blood ran cold. It was a shell company, buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy. It had been used to fund Cain's illegal operations, and it bore his signature, his name, a trap, a ticking time bomb ready to explode. Amelia appeared behind him, reading over his shoulder. Her sharp inhale cut through the silence. "They're going to blame you." Ethan's hands curled into fists. Cain had planned this from the beginning. If he exposed this document, if the media got a hold of it, Ethan wouldn't just lose everything. He would go down as a criminal, and Cain would walk free. Ethan straightened, his pulse steady. "This doesn't change anything," Madeline scoffed. "Oh, I think it does." "No." Ethan's voice was like steel. "It means we hit first." Amelia frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan grabbed his phone and dialed. The line clicked. A voice answered, smooth and professional. "This is Bennett. Detective Laura Bennett, a cop with a reputation for taking down untouchable men." Ethan had never trusted her before. But now he had no choice. "Detective," he said, "I have something you'll want to see." A pause, then, "Where?" Ethan exhaled. "Meet me at my penthouse in 2 hours." Madeline stared at him like he had lost his mind. "Are you insane?" she snapped. "Going back to your penthouse? Kane owns half the city. He'll be watching." "I know," Ethan said. And that was the point. It was time to draw Kane out. Before they left, Ethan found Oliver sitting on the floor, coloring in an old notebook. The boy's small hands gripped a blue crayon, scribbling furiously. Ethan crouched beside him. "What are you drawing?" Oliver hesitated. Then slowly he turned the page. Ethan's throat tightened. It was a picture of 2 figures, one big, one small, standing side by side. The caption scrawled in shaky letters, "Me and Dad." Ethan swallowed hard. Oliver looked up at him, eyes uncertain. "Are you going to leave me too?" A knife to the chest. Ethan's breath shook. He had no idea how to be a father. But he knew one thing. He would burn the whole world down before he let Oliver think he wasn't wanted. He reached out, pulling the boy into his arms. Tight, unbreakable. "Never." The penthouse was silent when Ethan stepped inside. Too silent. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes. They were being watched. Detective Bennett stood near the window, scanning the city skyline. She turned at the sound of the door. "You sure about this, Drake?" Ethan set a folder on the table. "Open it." Bennett flipped through the documents, her expression darkening. This is enough to bury him. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Then do it." Madeline shifted uneasily. "What's your plan?" Ethan turned to the window, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. "We're making Kane think he's won." Madeline blinked. "Excuse me." Ethan smiled, cold, calculated, deadly. "We let him leak the documents." A pause. "Let him think he's destroyed me." Madeline's eyes widened. "Ethan, he'll be so focused on watching me fall," Ethan continued. "He won't see what's coming next." Bennett crossed her arms. "And what exactly is coming next?" Ethan's voice was a whisper. The world burned around him. Flashing cameras, shouting reporters, headlines smeared across screens. Ethan Drake, the fall of a billionaire. He had walked into the trap, and now he was the one in handcuffs. The cold steel bit into his wrists as officers shoved him into the back of the police car. Through the tinted glass, he saw Madeline. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the TV monitors, flashing above the crowd. And there, Jonathan Kane's face, smiling, triumphant, like he had already won. Not yet. Inside the precinct, they threw him into a small interrogation room. Dim light. No windows, a metal chair, a table. He had been in rooms like this before, but never on this side of it. Detective Laura Bennett walked in, a file tucked under her arm. She didn't sit. She just stared at him. Then, she tossed the file onto the table. "Tell me why I shouldn't believe everything in there." Ethan exhaled, slow and steady. Inside the file were hundreds of pages of financial statements, contracts and emails, documents that made it look like he had funded Kane's operation. His signature, his company, his money. A perfect crime, a perfect setup. Ethan met her gaze. "Because it's a lie." Bennett didn't blink. "That's exactly what a guilty man would say." Ethan smirked. "And a smart detective would know better." A muscle twitched in Bennett's jaw. She was smart. Oh, she was also running out of time. The media had already convicted him. And Kane. Kane was celebrating elsewhere in the city. Jonathan Kane sat in his glass tower sipping a drink. The news played in the background. Ethan Drake, arrested, his company plummeting, his legacy destroyed. It had been so easy, too easy. Kane frowned, because if there was one thing he knew about Ethan, he never went down without a fight. Something wasn't right. And then his phone rang, a voice shaking. "Sir, we have a problem." Kane's grip tightened around his glass. "What kind of problem?" A beat of silence. Then, "The files? They're fake." The glass shattered in his hand. In the interrogation room, Ethan leaned back in his chair, waiting for the call. For the moment, it all turned. And then, the door burst open. Madeline, a USB drive in her hand. She tossed it onto the table. Bennett frowned. "What is this?" Madeline's smile was razor-sharp. "Proof." Bennett plugged it into her laptop, and the screen flickered, revealing everything. The real financial records, the hidden accounts Kane had used, the emails proving Kane had orchestrated everything, and the final piece, a recording of Kane, bragging, admitting everything. Bennett's eyes widened. This is airtight." Ethan smiled, slow and dangerous. "Call the judge." The charity gala was in full swing. The city's elites filled the grand ballroom, sipping champagne, oblivious. Kane stood at the center, shaking hands, laughing, until the doors burst open. A wall of uniformed officers stormed inside, and at the front, Ethan, alive, free, and smiling. Jonathan Kane went pale. Bennett stepped forward, pulling out a warrant. "Jonathan Kane, you're under arrest." The crowd gasped, cameras flashed, and for the first time, Kane looked afraid. He lunged for an exit, but Ethan was faster, a hard fist to the gut. Kane staggered. Ethan grabbed him by the collar, voice low and dangerous. "This is for Oliver." Then he let go, and Kane fell, right into the hands of waiting officers. Game over. Later that night, Ethan found Oliver sitting on the penthouse balcony, staring at the city lights. He sat down beside him. Oliver didn't look up. "Is he gone?" Ethan nodded. "For good." Oliver was quiet for a long time. Then, "Do I still have to leave?" Ethan's chest tightened, because for the first time, he realized Oliver was afraid. Afraid that, now that the fight was over, Ethan wouldn't want him anymore. Ethan turned to him. Soft. "Certain. You're staying." Oliver blinked up at him, hopeful. "Forever?" Ethan nodded. "Forever." And when Oliver leaned into him, small hands clutching his sleeve, Ethan knew. He had won the only battle that ever truly mattered. The world was quieter now. No flashing cameras, no sirens, no whispers of betrayal. Just the distant hum of the city below. Ethan stood on the penthouse balcony, watching the skyline. Everything had changed, and yet so much still remained uncertain. Inside, Oliver sat cross-legged on the couch, flipping through a picture book. A child's voice filled the space. Soft, tentative. Will she really come back? Ethan turned, his gaze locking onto Oliver's. Amelia, the woman he had spent years searching for. The woman who had given up everything to protect their son. And now, she was finally coming home. They met at St. Jude's Medical Center. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air as Ethan walked down the corridor, his heart pounding. Madeline was waiting outside the room. "She's stable," she said. "But it's been years, Ethan. Be prepared." He nodded and pushed open the door. And there she was, Amelia. She was thinner, her skin pale. But her eyes, those sharply intelligent eyes, were still the same. She looked at him and smiled. "You haven't changed." Ethan swallowed. But he had. Everything about him had changed. And it had all started because of Oliver. He moved closer. "She told me you'd come," Amelia whispered. Ethan frowned. "She?" Amelia exhaled a weak laugh. "Oliver." A beat of silence. He always believed in you, Ethan. Even when I didn't. Ethan closed his eyes. A second chance. Not just for him, but for all of them. Meanwhile, across the city, Jonathan Kane's empire was collapsing. His offshore accounts were frozen. His loyal allies jumping ship. The board of directors at his company held an emergency meeting, and by the end of the day, Jonathan Kane was no longer a billionaire. Ethan stood in his office, watching it all unfold. Kane's world had burned to the ground, and Ethan Drake had struck the match. That night, Ethan took Oliver home. For the first time, no threats, no danger, no fear, just quiet, just family. Oliver clung to his teddy bear, hesitating at the doorway. You sure I can stay? Ethan knelt in front of him, his voice steady. You're not just staying, Oliver. A pause. You're home. Oliver's face broke into the biggest smile Ethan had ever seen. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Drake knew what it felt like to truly belong. The morning light spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Drake's penthouse. For the first time in years, he woke up to something other than silence. The soft hum of cartoons played from the living room. The scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. And in the kitchen, Oliver was making a mess. Ethan leaned against the doorway, watching as the boy clumsily poured cereal into a bowl. Milk splattered across the counter. Oliver flinched. Sorry, he mumbled. Ethan chuckled, grabbing a towel. It's just milk, kid. Oliver looked up, uncertain. He had spent too long being careful, too long afraid of making mistakes. Ethan ruffled his hair. You don't have to apologize for every little thing. A slow smile crept across Oliver's face. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally safe enough to be a kid again. That afternoon, Ethan sat in his study, staring at a blank check. He had built empires, made fortunes, but none of it had ever meant anything. Not until now. His laptop screen displayed the name of his newest project, the Oliver Foundation, a nonprofit for abandoned and at-risk children. Not just for Oliver, for every child like him. Ethan signed the check, and with it, he signed his name to something bigger than himself. Ethan wasn't the only one learning to move forward. That evening, Oliver sat on the couch, clutching the tattered envelope he had carried with him since the night they met. Inside was a single drawing, one he had made a long time ago. A sketch of a man, his father. For years, he had drawn and redrawn the same picture, trying to imagine what his father would be like. He had always drawn him with a kind face, with a warm smile. He never thought he'd actually meet him. Ethan sat beside him. Oliver hesitated, then handed him the drawing. I used to think this was just a dream, Oliver whispered. Ethan stared at the sketch, his throat tightening. I never knew how to be someone's dad, he admitted. Oliver's small fingers curled into the fabric of his sleeve. Well, he said, I think you're doing okay. Ethan exhaled a quiet laugh. Maybe that was enough. A month later, Ethan stood before a packed auditorium. The launch of the Oliver Foundation. The room was filled with reporters, investors, and community leaders. But at the front row, only two faces mattered. Amelia and Oliver. Ethan stepped up to the podium, gripping the edges. For years, his speeches had been about profit margins, expansion, power. But today, he spoke for something greater. When I first found Oliver, Ethan began, I thought I was saving him. He looked at the boy, who sat grinning proudly. But the truth is, he saved me. The room fell silent. Ethan took a breath. This foundation isn't just about charity. It's about giving kids a chance to be more than what the world tells them they are. A pause. It's about giving them what Oliver gave me, a reason to believe in something more. The applause was deafening. Oliver beamed. And Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The sun was setting over New York City. From the balcony of his penthouse, Ethan Drake stood in silence, watching as the skyline turned gold. It had been months since that stormy night when he found Oliver. Months since his life had changed forever. And now, it was time to say goodbye. Ethan found the envelope on the dining table. It was addressed to him in messy, childish handwriting. His heart pounded. He unfolded the letter, his hands trembling. Inside was a simple message, written in pencil. You found me in the rain, but I found a home in your heart. A sharp exhale escaped his lips. Ethan blinked, trying to focus on the words, but his vision blurred. In the envelope was one more thing, a drawing, the last one Oliver had made before leaving. It showed two figures, a man and a boy, standing side by side, holding hands. A single word was scribbled underneath, family. Ethan pressed his fist against his mouth. He had spent years believing that money was everything, that wealth and power would make him whole. But in the end, it was a child's love that saved him. The next morning, Ethan stood outside Oliver's new home, a small, quiet house on the outskirts of the city, a home filled with laughter and warmth. Oliver ran out the front door, arms wide, straight into Ethan's embrace. You came, Oliver whispered against his chest. Of course, I did, Ethan murmured, tightening his hold. Oliver leaned back, peering up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. You'll still visit, right? Ethan smiled. Every chance I get. Oliver grinned, and for the first time, he truly believed it. Months passed. The Oliver Foundation grew, expanding into shelters, scholarships, and adoption programs. Ethan dedicated everything to helping kids who had once been like Oliver, lost, afraid, alone, but now never forgotten. Ethan sat in his office late one evening. His assistant knocked, stepping inside. Sir, there's someone here to see you. Ethan turned, and standing at the door was Oliver. Older, taller, but still the same boy who had once sat in the rain, waiting for him. Hey, Oliver said, grinning. Ethan smiled back. Welcome home, kid. And with that, the story came full circle. Sometimes the greatest treasures in life aren't found in wealth or success. They're found in the people who change us forever. Ethan thought he had it all, but in the end, it wasn't his billions that saved him. It was a boy, lost in the rain, with nothing but a tattered teddy bear and a heart full of hope. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in Ethan's shoes that night, would you have stopped? Would you have taken Oliver in? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because trust me, you won't want to miss the next story. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful. And remember, sometimes the smallest hands leave the biggest marks on our lives. Subscribe now, and I'll see you in the next one.